if you want advice about what you should do for your career, I would say joining a design agency is probably the best thing. That's what I did. Despite some of his like craziness over the last probably 5 years, you know who I'm going to say. I
Yeah,
absolutely adore Kanye West as like
yeah.
a musician, as a creative person. I watched every interview with him. At the end of it, he said, "Yeah, would love to have you here. When can you start?" And I said, "In about 2 years' time." And he looked at me.
Yeah.
He said, "You're joking, right?" And I said, "Nope. I'll see you in 2 years."
Welcome to Entry Level. My name's Ayer. I'm from Live Circular, and today I've got James, a friend of mine who's a designer, and I'm not going to give too much about his intro myself. I want him to talk about himself. So, James, if you were to describe yourself in 3 sentences, how would you go about it?
I would say that my name's James. I'm a designer. I run a small design studio based in London and generally work with startups, tech companies, investors. And on the
Yeah.
side, I'm a photographer and do some other bits and pieces too.
How long have you been in London for?
I've been in London since 2017, so I don't know, about 6 years.
Okay. And what inspired the move?
So basically, I was actually finishing uni. I was planning to go either to the US or just to keep working in Oxford, which is where I was born.
Yeah.
Um, and I had a great job in Oxford. I had an amazing boss, and the opportunity came up to move to London. I thought it was something I wanted to do in the future, and the offer or the opportunity just seemed too good to turn down, really. So yeah, I took it, and I
Yeah.
have loved it since then.
Mate. Okay. I've been looking into the whole US situation recently, and I've only realized how difficult it is to get a visa. I'm so surprised that you didn't take the opportunity now.
I know. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities I've had that have been ones I've looked back on. Maybe I should have done, maybe I shouldn't have done. But a lot of interesting stuff. I wouldn't change anything, I think.
That's positive. So you mentioned you have a studio. What's your background like as a designer? Yeah, what's your background?
So, interestingly, like I got into design through working in the NHS. I started out doing IT support, fixing computers and printers and stuff like that, in hospital in
Yeah,
Oxford. Messing around with design on the side. I'd always been interested in it. I really got into design properly when I was at school, through art lessons. Like I refused to do any of the painting and drawing that they asked
yeah,
me to do, and just messing around on Photoshop. Um, I did that, started messing around with apps on the side, like on pirate copies of Photoshop and stuff on my laptop,
of course, of course.
same way that everyone does, and loved it. Honestly, like, was just
Yeah,
obsessed with the idea of, like, UI before it was probably even called UI, um, and just designing interfaces. I love the constraints
yeah,
of it, and that's what I found most interesting compared to, like, having, like, a blank canvas to, like, paint on, which I just really did not care about. I like
yeah,
constraints of, like, a small screen and having to design these apps and stuff. Um,
yeah.
that was, like, the most interesting to me. I worked in the hospital for a while, for, like, a few years right after school,
Mhm.
um, not really considering design as a career, and then weirdly, like, through dealing with all of this, like, hospital software,
Possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
and works in a hotel, thank God. Um, Dealing with all of this software that was honestly was, like, horrible to use and, like,
Mm.
horribly designed. Um, I was kind of frustrated with how it looked and how it worked, and this was coming from someone who was, like, tech savvy and knew how to use software. There's people who were, like, doctors and nurses who were in their, like, 40s, 50s, whatever, who were having to use this software,
Yeah.
um, and was, like, super difficult to use, so I really was kind of confused by that as, like, a problem, and I asked if I could, like, tweak some stuff. I tweaked some of the designs and redesign some stuff, but obviously I couldn't because it was all third-party software and they had, like, contracts for everything, so,
Of course.
um, it was, like that's when I was really interested, and that's probably when the App Store was really, like, getting, like, ramped up properly. It was
Yeah.
2011, 2012, around that time.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I decided I will go to uni and get a degree in design and then come back and then see where we go from there.
Okay.
Went to uni and then never came back.
Did you go to university in London as well then?
No, I didn't. I went in Cheltenham, in the University of
Cheltenham?
Gloucestershire.
Okay.
It
I've
was
heard of
actually
Cheltenham.
weirdly, it was,
Racist.
I'd never heard of it, even though it was about 45 minutes down the road from where I lived.
Oh, seriously?
But it was one of the first courses that I found that was doing, like, any kind of UI design, UI, UX stuff like that, so
Yeah.
worked out pretty nicely.
What was your course called?
Went through a couple of different courses, like, it changed the name, like, halfway through for some reason. It started out as multimedia web design, which,
Yeah.
like, I don't think anyone's even said the word multimedia.
No. Oh my god.
Then it changed to digital media and web technology, which was
Yeah.
moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. So multimedia. If anyone, for myself, I'm old enough to know what multimedia means, but wow. That just reminds me of Dreamweaver. Did you ever
Exactly.
use Dreamweaver and like fireworks?
That was a big part of my uni course, which I refused
Oh,
to do.
there's
I
an
had a bit
internal
of a habit
pain.
in university of refusing to do a lot of the things that they asked us to do. For example, they asked us to use Dreamweaver, and I refused
Yeah.
and wanted to use I used a thing called Brackets at the time, it was like another code editor. I used one called Atom as well. Just anything to be the opposite of what they were asking us, to be honest.
I know the one. Brackets was the one with the black, blue, and white like icon, right?
Yeah, so
That was beautiful. I know exactly what you mean.
and that's why I used it because it looked so nice.
Well, as a designer, it makes sense, right?
Exactly.
You mentioned you started out designing and then you fell in love with the fact that screens and like the UX side of things has constraints. Does that mean that you started out as a graphic designer,
Um, I mean,
or would you
it's
call yourself that?
I'd never call myself a graphic designer. I mean, if anything, I'm more of a graphic designer now than I was back then.
Yeah.
Um, I I was always interested in various types of design. I was always, like, drawing stuff, making, like, random pictures and stuff. I was always actually into photography when I was, like, really young. I was taking a lot of videos and photos of my friends.
Hmm.
I was almost like our unofficial cameraman for my friend group. Um, but I would never say graphic design. It was really like I kind of dived straight into UI UX, pretty much around that time, 2011, 2012. And that was kind of like where I stayed pretty much for the next 7, 8, 9 years-ish. It's only in the last couple of years really I've branched out more into things like, I don't know, clothing design or, I don't know, more traditional, like, graphic design, I guess.
Really quick one. I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you do find it helpful and you think I'm adding value, it'd mean the world to me if you can share this video, or if you're listening to the podcast, if you could share that with somebody that you know who you think can benefit from what's being said in our podcast. But yeah, I hope you are having a good day, and we're still on a mission to get 1 million people into jobs, and I hope you can be there with me. Take care. Peace. The challenges. I want to explore that, but all right, let's do it. Yeah. So in terms of the fact that you've never really been a graphic designer, but you've found yourself branching out into it, what inspired the change? Because to me, they are two massive different they're different disciplines. They require
Yeah, yeah,
different parts of your
100%.
brain. For me, I'm scared when it comes to the white blank canvas, but you've been
It's
able to make the adjustment. How does it work? What's your
it's
process?
it's super interesting. I think, weirdly, like, a lot of the time I think of things through a UI, like, mindset. So, for
Hmm.
example, like, anyone who's worked with me on pitch deck designs, for example, or presentation designs,
Yeah.
um, will probably quite clearly see, like, a very heavy, like, UI styling to it,
Yeah.
um, which is interesting because, to be honest, like, a lot of presentation stuff probably does lean more towards graphic design. Where I see it, like, more different is in the fact that you have to really, like, nicely relay, like, a lot of information that can be quite boring,
Yeah.
and that kind of, like, transfer of, like, information or, like, data is more that side of it at least is more closer to, like, UI and, like, UX, like, mindset,
Okay.
at least in my mind. Um, so so that's really, like, the main part of it. Where I've kind of, like, started branching out more is and I was always, like, using Photoshop, like, I was using Photoshop when it was, like, CS1,
Yeah.
um,
Wow.
so yeah,
That's
yeah,
throwback.
yes, and that was, like, a pirate copy. The first, like, real version I got, I think, was
Yeah.
CS3, um,
Really?
and so, like, I've got a good, like,
Yeah.
probably at this point, probably 15 years of like Photoshop, like heavy knowledge. So, which obviously
Yeah.
is a lot more like graphic side. Um, what really changed was when I started applying a lot of the like graphic design ideas and styling stuff that I'd done to either photography that I was doing
Mm.
or just as like a way to kind of um, make the presentation designs that I was doing a bit more interesting. So, for
Yeah.
example, like playing with blending modes and stuff like that. That's kind of what got me back into it.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been playing around a lot more with, I guess, elements in Illustrator that also kind of lend themselves to that side, which is
Mm.
like warping text and things like that that I would normally use in branding, but actually has a
Yeah.
lot of nice applications that you can use in other areas. Um, I guess one way to like describe that or one way to talk about it is with a lot of like presentation design and like pitch deck design that a lot of companies use who are like in my like circle, I guess, of clients is
Yeah.
startups or tech companies that have raised investment or investment funds themselves is
Yeah.
a lot of people just using things like Google Slides and PowerPoint and stuff. And I'm not saying those
Yeah.
platforms are bad. It's just the from like the design point of
Design.
view, you're so limited.
Of
Um,
course.
there's really not much you can do. And so, for example, for me using Figma to design my presentations, immediately
Mm.
because I'm using a design tool, I have like 10 times or 100 times probably even the amount of like customizability that other people will have using just Google Slides or whatever. But
Yeah.
then I'll start applying like some of these like warp effects from Illustrator or
Yeah.
like these even just like applying textures with blending modes and stuff like that over the top. You're probably like
Okay.
times it by like another 10 on top of that. And so it's sort of like I in my mind, like what I find really interesting is how can you use like all these different tools together to do like a very specific job that
Yeah.
adds something that's just like very, very different. And I think that that applies across anything, whether it's like advertising, UI,
Mhm.
UX design, presentations, clothing design, which is like more interesting to me at the moment. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, so from correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like a bit of a layered approach. So, especially when you're doing the pitch deck stuff for your clients, it starts out where you work on the fundamentals and then you expand your scope of, I guess, design taste based on the
yeah,
things that you would have learned from
yeah,
your long background in designing on Photoshop or Illustrator. And then I guess you just take it up a notch sequentially after that.
totally. That's exactly how I do it. And I actually
Yeah.
I did a presentation like years ago, and I've actually got a slide that basically shows exactly that, what you just said. It's
Yeah.
about 10 slides long, and it takes you through, like, all of the different 10 steps I would go through, um,
Yeah.
from a presentation. And that's exactly what it is. Like, there's tools that I use that I pay for, and I use them for one super, super specific job,
Yeah.
but that one specific thing is, like, worth it. And
I,
to be
yeah.
honest, like, when you give something to a client, especially with I'm using pitch decks a lot, but something that we touch a lot is, like,
Hmm.
the difference is someone presenting like a white page with black text, and they're trying to convince someone that what
Yeah.
they're doing is like worthwhile investing or joining the company or whatever it is or purchasing
Yeah.
product. The difference is when you give them something that looks so unique and so different, the confidence that they actually have to present it is just like worlds apart,
Yeah.
and they feel like the presentation does a lot of the heavy lifting at that point, and they can really just focus on kind of pushing that story along, that own narrative, rather than trying to like, I don't know, like just try and grab the investor or whoever it is and just like beg them to like listen to their story.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna come back to that, and I really like the topic of I like the direction you were going in, but let's go back to your first job. What was your first job title?
My first job title was
Yeah. In the design world, of
in
course.
the
Yeah.
design world. Okay. My first
Yeah.
job title ever was service desk analyst at the hospital. My first
Yeah.
design job was um I guess just like designer or a junior designer probably at this agency.
Yeah.
Um and it was an agency that focuses on design for pharmaceutical products. So we're
Okay.
building like websites and apps for big pharmaceutical companies. We were designing packaging for like medication. We're
Mhm.
designing communities for doctors to discuss like new diseases and stuff. So I worked on honestly some very like bizarre stuff
Yeah.
in my time there. But I think working in an agency, although it wasn't something that I really initially planned, I
Yeah.
found them through Twitter actually doing to do my workplace.
Seriously.
Yeah, I found it through Twitter. Um, and was for sure one of the best jobs. I had like an amazing team that I was part of, an
Yeah.
insane like boss who was just like the most incredible manager. Still in touch with him today. Uh,
Yeah.
and we talk regularly now, and he has his own agency. I've got mine. We like very rarely like, but we like share work sometimes. We
Yeah.
meet up and talk about new things. I even went in and gave like a talk to his team a while ago, and I could really feel the difference of like going into a job as what felt like a very like rough designer. Like I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't necessarily know the best way to do it. And
Yeah.
then leaving there, I felt like a much more like refined designer where I had my style locked down. I knew kind of like what my like my purpose as a designer really was and like what I wanted to work on.
Mhm.
So definitely like owe a lot to that job.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. Very rounded answer.
Thanks.
How did you get that job?
So what was it was actually quite an interesting story. So when I when I first started uni, I
Yeah.
actually didn't have enough UCAS points to go to uni. So by what I think I can really only put down to as either um, a an admin error or maybe an act of God, I managed to get an unconditional offer to uni without any UCAS points almost.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was kind of a little bit panicking, thinking like, "Shit, I am I going to be out of my depth here? Like, what is going on?"
Mhm.
Um, and when I landed in the course, I saw that there was people in their second year and third year who were like struggling to get jobs.
Yeah.
They didn't have work placements lined up, and they were supposed to be starting them in a couple of weeks, for example. And so I was really like, "Shit, I need to get on this like fast if I'm gonna actually find anything." So
Yeah.
literally, I think within about a month of starting my course in my first year, I was already like applying for work placements like 2 years down the line.
Yeah.
And I actually sat down for a whole weekend and thought like, okay, I'm just gonna start now. I'm gonna find all of the design agencies, and I found them in England, in Scotland, in Sweden, in Iceland, in the US, all over the
Mm.
place, Portugal, everywhere. Um, and I was just emailing them like all of these ones. Sat down over a weekend. I just did it.
Yeah.
Uh, End up getting a reply from a quite a well known designer who had a design agency called Stuff and Nonsense.
Okay.
Guy called Andy Clark,
Okay.
and he replied and said, "I can't take anyone on, but I would love to just tweet out about it if you don't mind."
Mhm.
So I said, "Yeah, please, like, I would love it." And so he tweeted. I expected him to have a few hundred followers, but actually had about 30,000. Um,
Crazy.
so he tweeted, like, "Got a really nice email from this guy, James. He's looking for a work placement from university.
Yeah.
If anyone's available to chat to him, please do."
Yeah.
And I just off that alone, I was getting straight offers, not even interviews, but straight offers from, like,
Serious.
up and down the country, all over Europe, in the
Yeah.
US, everything. Um, and one of the people that replied to me was a guy, called Henry, who was at this design agency in Oxford, and I was
Yeah.
born in Oxford. I lived just down the road. My university was 45 minutes away, and he said, "Why don't you come in on Monday for coffee?" So, I went in, spoke to the design manager, a guy called Matt Newman,
Yeah.
and had a great conversation, spoke probably for an hour, a couple of hours maybe.
Yeah.
Um, and at the end of it, he said, "Yeah, would love to have you here. When can you start?" And I said, "In about 2 years' time." And he looked at me and
Yeah.
he said, "You're joking, right?" And I said, "Nope. I'll see you in 2 years."
Yeah.
So luckily, like I spent a weekend doing it,
Yeah.
sat down, emailed all these places, and by probably Sunday morning, I had my reply. By Monday afternoon, I had my placement confirmed. So
Serious.
that's how I got the job.
I like that. That's proper wholesome. Even you mentioned you had an act of God before when it came to uni. It sounds like you've had a few of those
I
because
think so.
this
I think I've definitely had more than a few of my
yeah. What's his name? Andy Clark. Andy Clark being able to blast you to, 30,000 people plus. That's
exactly.
crazy.
Shout out
Did
to
you
Andy Clark.
did you finish university? Oh, you
I
did.
did.
You did.
I did finish.
Yeah.
There's a few times where I felt like I just didn't really want to be there.
Yeah.
I'm never really that academic. I was always more interested in kind of just like working outside of uni.
Yeah.
Um, and so throughout my probably second year, my placement year for sure, and then my final year, I spent a lot of time like picking up extra freelance jobs. A lot of time on Twitter, talking to people in the industry.
Mhm.
Um, and it really felt like for a while, like university was holding me back a bit from
Yeah.
going full speed. I already had my job at this agency lined up for whenever I finished,
Yeah.
and I, to be honest, I was used to already, especially from working in the hospital, but from working in the agency and everything, and doing all these extra jobs. I was used to working like I don't know, 16 hours a day, probably. And so to go back to uni and have like 2 hours of lectures, like
Yeah.
3 times a week, just felt really weird. It felt like a lot slower.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, and credit to my uni now because I've been back and given like a few talks since I finished. Like almost every year, I've gone back and done a talk, and
Nice.
they've changed a lot of like the way that they thought about the course. And listened to a lot of my feedback, which was really good. For example, like a lot of the course was very heavily geared towards like developers and coding and especially people interested
Mhm.
in games, which I just wasn't interested in any of those things. I wanted to purely focus on design. And at the time, the course wasn't really set up to allow for that. So I did have quite a hard time a lot with straight up kind of arguing, I guess, with the lecturers and like fighting with them to try and because I just wanted to focus on design and really, really nail that down.
Yeah.
Since I left, they said that they've really changed the course to allow that, which I think is really good. And to kind of to support the people who just want to do design, support the people who just wanted to do code, for example.
Yeah.
But at the time, it wasn't really like that. So yeah, I definitely considered leaving, but ultimately managed to scrape through in the end.
What kept you there?
I mean, my mum was definitely saying, "Please just finish the course and get a degree."
Got you.
Um, there was definitely like that was part of it, and and at that point, like I didn't really have many contacts in the design industry, especially in the tech
Mhm.
industry. I think it was still kind of fairly like new, um,
Mm.
and like the whole like startup ecosystem. Um, I think it was I was still kind of in the mindset that although I knew that if I did like a lot of hard work and I was like really like trying to make stuff happen myself, there
Yeah.
would still be an element of like, oh, this guy doesn't have a degree, so let's just like throw his CV on the pile of like no's. Um,
Yeah.
which I think fortunately is like very different now. I mean, in all the hiring I've done, I have no idea if any of the people have degrees.
Mate.
And so that's probably like a decent sign. But at the time I think I was still like maybe a little bit naive to how it would go and probably just being a bit cautious as well.
Oh, again, very sensible, mate. It's very sensible. I'm guessing your mum being a big part of, like, your mum pushing you is probably for the better. It sounds like it worked out, and if you for instance, like, if you left, would you have been able to have the opportunities that you had after?
Looking back, I think I probably would have.
Oh,
I think
r
I I definitely think, like, a lot of the decisions I made, I was being cautious, but I knew what I was doing really as well. Nothing was really,
okay.
like, spur of the moment stuff. And even,
Yeah,
like, I was also very conscious that, like, by, like, working hard and, like, really setting aside the things that I wanted to do versus what I thought was, like, a good step for my career, especially early
yeah.
on, I really did know what I was doing, even if I wasn't at uni. I definitely
Okay.
also had, like, a good, um I had a good kind of view of both sides because my dad's, like, always been, like, self-employed, like, running his own business as well, and
Yeah,
so I had him on one side, like, saying to me, like, "Yeah, like, just keep working hard, like, whatever you do, like, if you don't finish uni, it's fine. If you don't get the best grade, it's fine because, like, you work hard like very hard as well. I know
Yeah.
that you have to pick it up. Whereas on the other side, I have my mum saying like, please just get a degree because like
Yeah.
you should get a degree, etc. So I think
Yeah.
I had a nice like uh, bit of like both of them like kind of bouncing off each other. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, it was a struggle
So
at times for sure.
so dad was the risk taker, mum's the
Oh,
keep it
100%.
with the system.
Yeah, yeah. And I 100% take after my dad. So,
Yeah.
for example, like after finishing uni and when I got this job offer in London, I moved to London and I did it for about 11 months, I think. I didn't really enjoy my time in like my first job there.
Mhm.
Um, and eventually, like after 11 months, I left there and interviewed at a few places, but ultimately just decided I'm I just don't want to go through the situation of having like a boss that I don't like, and especially like I just hated the feeling that you get a new job, you like it for about 3 weeks, and then you
Yeah.
realize, ah, this isn't it. And because
Yeah.
you got to stick there for a whole year or whatever it is, because people always say like don't
Jump
leave your
off.
job until you've been there a year or whatever. And I said, there's no way
Yeah.
I can do this for another 11 months or whatever, hating my job. And then you got the whole awkward thing of like kind of handing in your notice, hanging around for a few weeks, etc. I just didn't want to do
Yeah.
it. So I said, I'll just again just work really hard to try and make this work as a freelancer.
Yeah.
I never really looked back from then, to be honest.
Okay. I guess that leads into my next question. How many jobs did it take before you ended up setting up the studio? And what was your studio called?
Studio's called October. I was born on the 1st of October, and that was really all the thought that went into the name. Believe it or not, it
It's
took probably about a year to come up with a name during COVID. I was
yeah.
back and forth on a ton of different names, and in the end, I just thought, "Fuck it, I'll just call it October," and then
Keep it simple.
I'll change it when I got something better. And it's been about
Yeah.
3 years now. Um, how many jobs did I have? Design jobs.
Yeah.
2, probably. The one in the agency, and then the one where I was working in a startup I didn't really like.
Yeah.
Um, so probably 2 actual, like, official design jobs. Outside of design, probably another, like, 3 or 4 jobs on top of that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like, not that many, to be honest. And yeah, as soon as I did it, I never really looked back, and I went into freelancing first. But again, although it sounds maybe like I just kinda dived straight into it,
Yeah.
um there was also like a lot of like thought and preparation that went into doing it, and a lot of stuff again, which is probably like a theme, is I didn't really know what I was doing, but I kind of made some educated guesses of like what was the best way to maybe do it,
Mm.
uh, and ended up working out pretty nicely.
Okay. Did you know Henry? Did Henry give advice or was he a part of your journey when you went into freelancing?
Uh, no, not really at all. I actually didn't speak to him really at all after leaving the design agency I was at.
Oh,
Because he was just a developer there, and he was on Twitter. He just like gave us a but
got
maybe
you.
talking about Matt, who was my boss.
Okay. Maybe Matt. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, right. So yeah, so Matt was the guy who was like the boss at the my boss at the design agency. Um, I think he did. I think he actually gave me like a lot of advice. And I had like a few jobs in London, ranging from like this job at the startup I didn't like, some other bits I was where I don't know, had problems with clients or stuff like this, people not paying, etc. And he definitely like been around the block as a designer and really knew like what to do in a lot of these situations. So a lot of the time he actually did give me a lot of advice.
Yeah.
Um, I also think I felt like if I ever really needed like another job, he would probably like be able to give me something. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I honestly can't speak highly enough of this guy. He was just like one of the best managers
Yeah.
I've ever had. I tell him this pretty much every time I see him, and he's probably sick of hearing it now. So if he sees
Yeah.
this, he'll probably be sick of it again.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Literally.
Did he give any specific piece of advice that you would love to pay forward to whoever could be listening or watching this video?
Um,
So
I I mean, to be honest, it's been so long that a lot of the advice that he gave me, like people like my dad gave me, even like friends,
yeah.
that gave me is probably kind of all blurred into one. Plus, I've got the world's worst memory as well, which doesn't help.
Yeah.
But like, I remember getting pieces of advice, a lot of advice from people saying that like, especially in the design world, if you're really just like focusing on output and the quality of the output that you're doing, like you probably won't have to worry about much else.
Yeah.
Um, and I know for sure that that definitely stuck with me. Um, the idea that like you can worry about marketing, you can worry about finding clients, you can worry about your website, you can worry about all this stuff, your pricing, blah blah blah, whatever it is.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is important. Don't get me wrong, but none of that really matters if the work that you're doing isn't good. Whereas if the work that you're putting out consistently is really, really high quality,
Yeah.
you won't have to worry about any of the other stuff because there'll never be a shortage of clients. Um, and fortunately, like I feel like I made the right choice in taking that advice and really focusing on it.
Yeah.
And I've tried to definitely pay that forward a lot as well. Like I've given that advice to a lot of people, even the designers that like I've worked with through October as well. I've given that same advice to.
Yeah.
Um, And I 100% believe it, and I would literally die on this rock. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's one of the best pieces of advice. But the reality is like, also a lot of the people I've given that advice to, um, especially like some designers that have like messaged me from like my university and stuff to like follow up and things like that.
Yeah.
They look like they're keen. They want to hear the advice. You give them the advice, and they just don't really act on it. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm sure they have like 20 people giving them tons of different advice. It's hard to pick and choose what you take. But to me, I think I quite luckily landed on that as like quite a strong thing to head towards. And it's worked out nicely over the years, really.
Okay. That's brilliant. So output, how did you manage with output? Was that something that helped you land your first client? If not, how did you land your first client as a freelancer?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely helped for sure. I remember one of the things that really helped was again make just like making educated guesses of what seemed like smart decisions.
Yeah.
Um, at the time when I was working at this design agency, when I was messaging people like Andy Clark, um,
Yeah.
almost all designers were posting their work on Dribble. Dribble,
Yeah.
for anyone who doesn't know, and it used to have a system where you had to be invited to post your work on there.
Yeah.
I remember begging people on forums for
Yeah.
invitations and not getting one.
Yeah.
And I finally did get one. I think it might have even actually been Andy Clark as well that gave me an invite to Dribble, and I remember being absolutely over the moon when I got invited to it.
Yeah.
And I started posting my work on there, and I wasn't getting that much work, like freelance requests and things like that. And I was just thinking, like, I'm on a website with like 200,000 other designers, some of which have like 5, 10, 15 years more experience than I do.
Yeah.
And like, why are they going to choose me over choose any of these other people? Like, how am I going to stand out?
Yeah.
Mm. And I kept on posting, and gradually I posted less and less while I was thinking about it. And in the end, the best way to stand out was just to not post on there at all. And I started posting my work on Twitter instead. Um, at the time, my Twitter was pretty heavily geared towards football related tweets. And I realized that also wasn't getting me much design work from companies. So
Yeah.
I cleared my whole Twitter. I started changing my bio and stuff and changing my
Yeah.
handles to be more design related and things. Started mixing with like different circles on there, and I started like replying to people who were like project managers at Tinder in San Francisco and people who were going through Y Combinator with their startup and things. Started just
Yeah.
joining their conversations. Um, and then I just started posting my work on Twitter instead. And it
Mhm.
seemed like at the time, especially in the circles that I was mixing in, like there wasn't that many designers who were posting their work on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so it felt like really quickly for like the kind of like startup ecosystem in London and all these like startup-y like founders and investors and stuff. Really quickly, like I became almost like a go-to designer for them because
Yeah.
I was the only one that they were seeing because I was the only one posting my work on Twitter. Everyone else was on Dribble still.
Yeah.
Mm. And so I built my Twitter following up to maybe like a 1,500 people maybe. I'm still only on 2,200 or something, which is by no means
Yeah.
a lot. But
You don't
that
post, that's why.
it's true, like, I really don't post anymore, but,
Yeah.
like, that 1,500 followers I had gave me more than enough, like, freelance work for the first, like, 2, 3 years of freelancing, where I was, like,
Mm,
never busy, to the point where, like, I even made, like, a page on my website where if I post, like, a tweet, like, a specific link to it, it would come
yeah,
up and say, like, "I'm now available for freelance work," with, like, a
yeah,
nice image that said I was available. Never posted it once because I never had a chance to do it.
yeah.
And so I think that was, like, a big part of it. The other main one that I would say as well is, like, is just joining communities in London. Like, a lot of designers were hanging out with other designers and going to design events and stuff like that.
Mm,
And I just went to, like, events for developers or events for investors, events for, like, founders only and stuff like that. And, because all of those people were the people that needed designers. If I was in a room with designers, like, they weren't looking for more designers.
got a
Um,
point.
and those 2 things together probably were the 2, like, best decisions I made early on.
Okay. At what point did you go from being a freelancer to ending up, owning the studio that you've got now?
So, that's also, like, a fairly interesting story. So, I was freelancing, like you said, just by myself. I constantly had, like, work coming in, and I was getting, like, slightly bigger clients, slightly bigger budgets and stuff, and working with some,
Mhm,
like, really interesting companies. And this was kind of in the lead up to, like, the end of 2019. I did, like, a
mm,
big project with another design agency. I was helping them for kind of about 6, 7 months. Finished up with them, had a few months off, did, like, a little bit of, like, I guess, like, traveling, and then start of 2020 happens. I went to my old uni to go and give a talk,
yeah,
and, the talk was on freelancing versus, like, full-time work, and I said in this presentation, like, full-time work is actually not as secure as you probably think it is. You can be kind of fired at any time. You kind of really are at the kind of, like, rule of whatever your boss wants you to do.
yeah,
And on the same time, as a freelancer, like, however hard you work, like, if you wanna make more money, you do more work. If you wanna make more money, you raise your prices. You can find clients yourself, and if anything happens, like, you've got that to lean on. It's only just, like, on you to rely on.
yeah,
And, I said, like, when something bad happens, like, if there's, like, I don't know, the stock market crashes or whatever, and there's no jobs, um, you can't really defend against it if you're in a full-time job. Um,
yes,
a
that's the
month
point.
a month later, everyone got locked down because of COVID. And so luckily I was in a place where I was able
Yeah,
to take my own advice, and I'd, been kind of, like, prepping a little bit for it. And so although I'd saved up a bit of money from client projects just in case something happened, um, I was thinking, "Okay, we're locked down, everything's, like, going crazy. Um, I'm probably gonna have, like, a few months here where there's not that much work. I just need to, like,
mm,
prepare for it." And the complete opposite happened, and my email inbox was full. Like, every day I would wake up and there was, like, 10 more emails from potential clients. There's people booking calls,
yeah,
there's people DMing me on Instagram, there's people DMing me on Twitter, etcetera.
yeah,
And I just could not understand, like, why it had gone so crazy. Um, and so, like I mentioned before, it was, like, bigger clients, it was bigger projects. I was working with people like LinkedIn, Atlantic Records, like, big companies that people had actually heard of and stuff.
yeah,
Um, And although that was great, there was also more pressure as well, and more pressure to, like, get the stuff right. And, the longer that went on, the more nervous I was about just doing stuff myself, and also, like, turning down work as well. When I first started, I remember thinking, like, "I can't wait to be in a position where, like, I just have so much work." And now I had so much work coming in that I was having to turn down, like, more than half of everything that came in, which I just felt wrong as well, right?
yeah,
And so I decided I wanted to start finding some other people. Um, and the real funny part of that, which is almost a bit of, like, a full circle moment, was the fact that I was so focused on the output and the quality, which is the stuff that got me, like, to that point, was
yeah,
almost, a bit of a, a downfall here for a while, because it took me so long to find anyone that also had the same values.
yeah,
And so it genuinely took me maybe, like, 9 months to a year to find anyone that I felt happy, like, giving work to, um,
Mhm.
who I felt like actually understood the standards. And, uh, and that was that year when it happened, where when COVID happened, sorry, was, like, quite stressful, and at the point where, I brought someone else on to help me, just made, like, a big, big difference.
Okay. What's the process like for hiring your your first designer, I guess, when it comes to building an agency or sorry, a studio?
So, the process for me was pretty crazy. So, the first person that joined me was, a girl called Sade, who I'd known for probably, like, 2 or 3 years at this point. We followed each other on Twitter and Instagram, I think, although I didn't
Mhm.
even know she was a designer at the time. And we hadn't really spoken, and eventually, just completely out of the blue, at the absolute most perfect timing, she DM'd me on Instagram and said, "Hi, James, like, I'm looking to get into UI UX design. Would you mind, um, reviewing, like, my portfolio? Let me know if you have any advice or anything like this." And I'm always keen to help, like, new
Yeah.
designers starting out. So I said, "Yeah, yeah, of course. Send it over." So she sent her portfolio link, and I remember looking at it and thinking, "How long has she been a designer for? Because it sounds like she's only been doing it for a few months, but this work is far too good for someone who's been doing it that
Yeah.
long." So, spoke to her, gave some advice, and, I said, like, "The work's really good quality, blah, blah, blah," all this stuff, and I remember saying to her, "If you want advice about what you should do for your career, I would say joining a design agency is probably the best thing." That's what I did.
Yeah.
But equally, if you're not interested in that, I'm trying to start a studio, and I'm looking for my first designer really to work with me,
Yeah.
and I would love for you to be that first designer, basically. And, fortunately, she agreed, and I made it very clear. I said, right from the start, I said, "This is my first time managing anyone, so I'm probably gonna
Yeah.
do lots of it wrong." Um,
Yeah.
and I also said, the other side of it is I will be, like, as open to whatever you want. There's no egos, like, you can
Yeah.
criticize my work, I can criticize your work. Um, I will teach you as much as you wanna know. If you wanna start your own studio in the future, I will help you with that. If you wanna learn about pricing, invoicing, finding clients, whatever, I'll help you
Yeah.
with all that. I said to her, "I'll protect you from the bad points of working with clients, and I will, um, like, celebrate your work to them and make it clear, like, that stuff that you do that's good is your work and stuff like that. I won't take credit for it."
Yeah.
I said to her, like, "Tell me your day rate, and I will always pay your day rate or above your day rate when I can."
Yeah.
Um, but I said, "In return for that, the quality, like, can't ever drop." And that's why people work with us. That's still why people work with us, because they know that, the projects that we work on, we treat it like it's our own company or our own project. And I
Yeah.
said, as long as you understand the quality of the product and the output doesn't drop, then it will be fine and we'll have the best time. Um, and and fortunately, again, she agreed.
Yeah.
And that's basically how it went. The projects we worked on together have been amazing. We've had some of the most insane feedback from companies. We've worked on, like, some awesome projects as well.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's just one of the best, hires, I guess, I could have ever made, although one of the few
Yeah.
as well.
For your first hire to go so well, like, that is incredible, mate.
I think a lot of it is just down to, like, I think that, like, honesty up front. I said to her, like, "I'll be as flexible as I can. Like, I'll tell you if there's no work. I'll tell you if I can't, like, pay you for stuff.
Yeah.
I'll be flexible if you wanna take, like, a week off or you wanna take a month off, blah, 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 then that's fine." I said, like, "If you don't wanna work evenings and weekends, that's totally fine." But I think laying it out on the table of, like, really what I'm prepared to give and what I need back from the start, I think probably solved a lot of headaches. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things I was most nervous about is I I don't particularly enjoy, like, confrontation with people and, like, getting into arguments and stuff like this. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things that made me most nervous. But I knew that also the quality of the work is one thing that I really wasn't going to compromise on at all. And so
Yeah.
I needed to make that clear from the start. And that's really the only way I could have done it, I think.
Mate, it sounds brilliant. Clearly it worked out.
Thank God.
How
Um,
many designers do you work with today?
Today is interesting. I've This year's been slightly slower, I guess, than last year.
Yeah.
Um, it's Most projects have been still with like me on everything. I've had a few
Mhm.
projects with Sade, although a little bit less than last year. And then I also have a girl called Deshita as well, who helps, who's a bit more like operations stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and then I have a few friends who are like videographers or editors and stuff like that who help with like a few bits whenever we do like video stuff. We've done a couple of like video projects. Um, and then a couple of designers that I've tried to work with on branding stuff.
Yeah.
Although for the most part, I've just ended up working on those myself. So it's probably like four of us. My brother helps on some bits as well, although
Yeah.
he probably hates it because he's not a designer. I don't think he has any plans
Yeah.
to become a designer. So yeah, probably like three of us at the moment, four of us maybe. It kind of fluctuates, to be honest, depending on what the project is.
No. Okay. So 4 designers. You've been going around for 3 years. What's been your biggest project so far, or the one that you're most proud of?
Um, we've had some awesome ones actually, like a lot that I really loved. Some of the ones I'm most proud of are projects that were my friends' companies.
Yeah.
Something that I actually didn't really plan for at the start, but we had almost a whole year. I think we had like 10 or 11 months where every project was a company, like one of my friends' companies,
Yeah.
and was just like the most insane feeling. Like, I think that was maybe 2021 maybe, or 2022, I honestly can't remember.
Yeah.
And, being able to just, like, help my friends, like, we're bouncing ideas on WhatsApp calls at, like, 3 AM, and then we're meeting up on the weekend to work on stuff. It was insane. It's one of the best things that's happened for sure, and I jump at the opportunity to work on those projects now. I literally just wrapped up, like, a whole design project with one of my closest friends on his company, and it's just the best project.
Yeah.
I know you just asked for one. I've got to give you a few.
Give me more, man.
There's a company called Trim
Oh,
It, which was a
yeah.
mobile barbershop service.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the piece of work that got me the most, like, attention as well, was just, like, an awesome company, awesome team.
Yeah.
Thingtesting.com,
Yeah.
the founder, Jenny, is, like, amazing. I've known her for years, and so to be able to work on that with Sade as well was just, like, an absolute dream.
Yeah.
Landscape, the one that we just wrapped up now,
Yeah.
awesome. Another one called Outverse, it's like an online community platform. Again, the founder of that, Kieran, was one of the first friends I made in London, really, when I first moved here, and so
Yeah.
getting to work on companies like that for people was just, like, the best.
Yeah.
And I'm I feel genuinely, like, extremely fortunate to be in that position to be able to not only, like, them to give me the work, but them to give me the work knowing that, like, I'm gonna really, like, care for it, put
Yeah.
the hours in to make it work, care about the details and stuff, and give them something at the end that they're, like, really proud of. And, yeah, it's fine getting I mean, it's great getting feedback from clients saying like, "Oh, we love your work, blah, blah, blah." But when it's, like, someone who's, like, close to you and, like, you invite them to your
Yeah.
birthday as well and stuff like that, and you see them succeeding, it's
Yeah.
totally different feeling.
Let's go a long way. Okay. Those are some they're really cool companies. A few of them, I've been, fortunate enough to know some of the people behind them as well and what they built. So even being on the outside, being able to see your work live in production, that's been quite crazy from just like a spectator standpoint. I'm always excited whenever you release a new project, man.
It's funny, I'm actually a bit secretive with our work,
Yeah.
partly due to, I guess, busyness and workload, but
Yeah.
also due to, just, like, I've just got, like, a weird perfectionism as well, which is, like, extremely frustrating, and um,
Yeah.
I've been harassed about it by friends, clients, my parents,
Yeah.
even Sade, Luke, and Tashita on my team as well.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, I very rarely update the October website.
Yeah.
Um, I rarely post anything on Twitter anymore. I rarely post any of my work on Instagram, um, which is bad. It's extremely bad.
Yeah.
And I mean, the October Instagram, for example, I think it's got 3 posts on there, and none of them are our work. It's just like
Yeah.
graphical stuff. So it's something that I'm really working hard to change.
Yeah.
It's just I have such like I think an appreciation for so many different styles that it's hard to nail down one way that I want to do something, and
Yeah.
that's probably my biggest problem. I think it's probably a bit of an ADHD trait, uh,
Yeah.
and uh, and I know it frustrates a lot of people around me, and
Yeah.
it's definitely a detriment to like our work as well. Because some of the stuff that we put out, I'm super proud of,
Yeah.
uh, but a lot of people just don't see it, and so it's something that I'm really actually at the moment working hard to sort out, basically.
Mate, if you ever need any pointers, I'll be telling you to flip a coin or eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and just go with something.
I think so. I think it's the best way.
But perfectionism is a curse and a blessing, or a blessing and a curse for most of us designers. You mentioned before that you've done some work with corporate companies or companies that require pitch decks. How did you manage to land those clients?
That was an interesting one as well. It's one that I almost kind of fell into a little bit. So I first started doing presentations or designing presentations when I was at university.
Yeah.
Um, and there's one good story that one of my closest friends, Jordan, is very keen to remind me of regularly, where we had to give a presentation at uni, and everyone was using, I think, PowerPoint
Yeah.
or some kind of like cloud thing, Google Slides maybe, and everybody refused. Sorry, everyone was using that, and I refused to do it. I refused to use that, and I wanted to use Keynote for mine because I could design it better. And we were given a presentation in this big kind of like auditorium like space at uni, and everyone was sat up on all these seats, and the lecturers were there. And
Mm.
I stood at the front for probably close to 40 minutes, making everybody wait while I got it set up so I could share the keynote by cloud onto the computer
Yeah.
with Blade, because I refused to use anything that would compromise the design that I could do. And needless needless to say, everybody in the room was absolutely furious about it. Um, but I refused to do anything different. Um, and uh, and that's really kind of where it started. Like I got interested again in this idea of the constraint of just like a slide and being able to put everything on there in the best way and just and show it in the best way.
Mm.
And from there, I got involved in a lot of pitches when I worked at the design agency. The one I mentioned in Oxford was called Incuna. I did lots of pitch work for them on pitches for projects on pharmaceutical companies, things like that.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time designing those, working on animations and stuff to get nice transitions and things. Just basically anything that would, I guess, make it more memorable, bring more attention to it, stuff like that. Even building entire like mock-ups of like apps and things in Keynote just to show in presentations. Um, a lot of crazy stuff, and that's kind of where it got interesting. When I first started doing it for clients was when I was in London. I was working with a bunch of different startups,
Hmm.
and I remember I did some branding work. I did a website, um, and then the company said to me, "Do you happen to do pitch decks?" And I said,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I can do a pitch
Sure.
deck, no problems." So they sent it over, and I was just looking at what they had, which, like I mentioned earlier, was a white page with black text. And so I started treating it like UI, like I mentioned earlier, and I was designing like
Yeah.
everything from like the page number indicators and stuff in the same style as what we were using on their website and their app and things like that. And using the same fonts and the same gradients and stuff as on the website, and really treating it like an extension of those things rather than a separate document that had just like one purpose, I guess. Um, I did that one, and then they showed it to their investor, and then their investor asked if I could help one of their other companies do it, and then I did theirs, and then the investor was raising a new fund, and then they asked if I could do the presentation for their fund, and it kind of snowballed from there. And to be honest, it's been one of the biggest like recurring project types for the agency, basically or the studio. So everything we do is UI UX,
Yeah.
pitch decks, or branding, and that's pretty much everything. And then occasionally we do some other small random thing,
Yeah.
but that makes up like 95% of the work. And um, like I mentioned before, it's one of those things I think where fortunately I got in with some investors, and they didn't know that many other designers, and once they saw the quality was good and the effort was good and the fact that I was willing to work Friday night and Saturday night and Sunday night for a quick turnaround
Yeah.
like this, think it makes a difference for sure. And if people know that they can rely on you when they really need it,
Yeah.
makes a big difference, I think. And it's fun. The other side of it is just it's fun. I like doing presentations and stuff, and I like messing around. A lot of the stuff that I do for clients, I learned it because I was just messing around myself, trying to do some nice stuff. And like I mentioned, I did a bunch of
Yeah.
talks in my uni. I pissed a bunch of people off there by messing around with the design. Now I get
Yeah.
to do it for clients and get paid for it. So what could be better?
Doesn't sound bad. Doesn't sound bad at all. I mean, it allows you to not have to have a full-time job at the moment, and I guess that's something that's really hard to sustain in this economy right now. So, yeah, it sounds like it's going well.
Definitely.
I've got a final question. Well, I've got 2 final questions. One thing that's really big, it means a lot to me, especially considering our audience is largely people that may be looking at their first jobs in the industry, is salary transparency. Now, I don't know if I've probably put it somewhere on Twitter, but I like to explain what my first salary was. And because everyone that I'm hopefully going to interview has already had a few, I hope it's not too sensitive. But just in case, my first salary was 32K. I got hired as a digital designer for an agency in Manchester. What was yours?
Going back a few years, my first non-design salary was
Yeah.
probably
Ooh,
18,000 maybe.
sounds about right.
My first design salary, I think, was slightly above that, 22 maybe,
Yeah.
23 around that, probably maybe 24 if it was a push.
Yeah.
Uh, and then my second design job I got, I think, was 36 maybe,
Okay.
36,000.
Yeah. Sounds like the pay jumps were nice.
They
Hey.
were. I think, it was probably happening at, like, a good time as well. Like, I think companies were
Yeah.
more aware of, like, the value of design and stuff.
Yeah.
Although I still think I was, especially in the second one, I was probably underpaid. I was definitely doing a lot of different jobs.
Yeah. That I can relate to, and I know what you mean. In terms of design, how old was you when you got your first job? I didn't ask.
Pretty much straight
First
out,
design job, sorry.
straight my first design job when I did, my work placement at uni, I was
Yeah.
probably 19, I reckon,
Okay.
probably 19.
Yeah.
I've been doing some small, like, client projects and stuff before that when I was, like, 17, 18, 19, whatever, but,
Yeah.
my first real job was probably 19 in design, I think.
Okay. What do you look forward to the most in the future?
Um, that's a really good question. I think I talked to you before about where I said, oh, there was one point where I definitely wanted to build the biggest or the best design agency.
Yeah.
Um, but I said maybe that wasn't my goal anymore. Maybe my goal was actually to build like a small design agency where the work is really good. Everyone's having a great time. Everyone is paid super well and has a lot of flexibility and stuff. I would love to do that still.
Yeah.
Um, I think what I'm interested in at the moment um, is kind of like really fulfilling myself creatively across a lot of different areas.
Yeah.
So I want to explore things like clothing. I want to explore photography more. I want to explore, I don't know, everything. I want to touch like every kind of design. I think that's the most interesting thing to me at the moment.
Yeah.
Physical product design. I would love to do.
Yeah.
And so I think at the moment is I would even love to do films like TV, movies, stuff like that. I think would be such an interesting thing to work on. So I think at the moment it's how do I build like a good foundation for that as of like a good sustainable business that makes like good money
Yeah.
that that does great work, and how can I build these other things off the side of that to kind of build almost like a bit of a network of companies, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that's the main thing. I definitely feel a lot of like of fulfillment of doing a lot of different stuff. Just doing UI UX design, I probably would go insane. Just doing pitch decks, I'd probably go insane. Being able to like pick up a camera and go and take some photos, my friends, I absolutely like I
Yeah.
adore doing it. And so I think that's what I'm most excited about is like how can I reach a point where like I'm doing that and in a way that like makes good money. I get to work with great people, with great companies.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's really is the goal.
Okay, I like that. Very rounded again. I guess you're just a really rounded person. In
Good.
terms
I hope that's a good thing.
in terms of creatives, companies, brands where they exist in the realm of design, of course, but also just as a creative themselves, worded horribly, but I think you'll get where I'm going with this. Who do you take inspiration from the most, or who are 3 people that or 3 brands that you take inspiration from?
I love answering this question because I have so many answers to it as well.
Yeah.
And despite some of his like craziness over the last probably 5 years,
Yeah.
you know who I'm going to say. I
Yeah.
absolutely adore Kanye West as like
Yeah.
a musician, as a creative person. I watched every interview with him. Basically, there's one that stands out that he did with the Oxford Union, Oxford University.
Yeah.
And, if you haven't watched it, and even if you absolutely hate him, you despise him, I
Yeah.
say if you're a creative person, it's a must watch because although the sound quality is terrible and the video quality is probably even worse,
Yeah.
um, the stuff that he says in there is absolutely spot on, and it's, um, I genuinely think about the stuff that he says in there probably, like, every month, if not every week, still to this day, and it's like the how he thinks about creativity, um, being a multidisciplinary, like, creative as well, I think is so valuable, the stuff that he says.
Yeah.
Um, and it and that was at a time when he probably hadn't even fully proved it. I think now with what he's done in fashion and architecture and stuff, blah, blah, I think he's really proved that the stuff that he was saying back then is true. That's one. Another one that I absolutely love is, a guy called Ronnie Feig, who, is the founder of clothing brand called Kith.
Mhm.
Um, he's also, like, extremely interesting. I love the brand, take a lot of its inspiration from there. Um, there's, Teddy Santis from Aimé Leon Dore. I take a lot of inspiration from them. Who else? There's a photographer, a famous photographer called Slim Aarons as well, from, like, a
Mhm.
photography point of view. I think he's, like, one of the best. There's a lot, and it really varies across a lot of different places. There's a guy called Arthur Casas, who's a
Yeah.
Brazilian architect. His work is unbelievable. Um, so yeah, there's a big mix, but I would say if you're interested in lots of different spaces of creativity, check those ones out. I think they're all awesome. And I will say actually on top of that as well,
Yeah.
there's one interview that I think is amazing on YouTube called it's by Complex, part of their Blueprint series.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's John Mayer, the singer,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Jerry Lorenzo from Fear of God.
Yeah.
And they basically just sit down and just talk about like design and creativity and stuff for like an hour or something. And it's well worth watching. Um, and so yeah, that's another awesome one.
Okay. Brilliant. We've got a good list of people to look into. Some of them already heard about, but even the founder from Kith, I've never come across, so I'm more than happy to
Please do.
research, and I'm sure the rest of the community would like that. My last question, I'm a big fan of reading. I like to just take as much content in, doesn't really matter what genre it is. But I always ask people, do they read, first of all? Do you
I'm
read?
actually embarrassingly, I almost never read.
Why
My
not?
my girlfriend is like a huge book reader, and she showed me the other day that she's read 160 books or something, and I
Jeez.
had to just kind of quickly change the subject. Um, I don't read books that much, although I used to read a lot, and I
Yeah.
actually love reading. I just feel like I don't have the attention span for it these days.
Okay.
I watch a lot of interviews, like a lot of video interviews, um, a lot of articles,
Yeah.
and spend a lot of time reading like threads on Twitter, which is probably like not even a good thing. But and I would love to get back into reading if I'm honest, but
Yeah.
sadly I don't. I take in my advice and content in other ways, I guess.
If there's any book that I would advise you to read, whether it's audiobook or physical, it would be Shoe Dog. I think your personality, from what I know of you, you would be impressed by the attention to detail that Phil Knight had in terms of business, operation, and his overall desire to build something of value, as well as that the people that he employed and even his co-founder, how they approached life and approached building a business. As you can imagine, Nike as a brand, it started out being running shoes for track and field athletes, and where it's at today, it's clothing, it's lifestyle, it's still footwear, it's a movement, it's a culture, and I think you would be fascinated by the story of Phil Knight if you haven't checked him out already. And
I will. I've actually got the book somewhere here. I bought it.
seriously,
I got the book here
oh
somewhere,
mate,
it's probably 8 years old or something now. Um,
please, yeah,
I need to dig it out, and I will read it because I watched the Air movie recently,
yes, yes, yes,
and yeah, loved it. And I'm well aware of the story and
yeah,
a lot of the things you said, but I will read the
yeah.
book. I'd love to get in more detail.
Mate, the book's even better. Yeah, you'd like his story. It might inspire a few things when it comes to becoming an interdisciplinary creative.
Oh god,
Let's say
I'm worried. It says one thing I don't need anymore is probably inspiration at the moment.
it's execution at this point. All right, James, how can people find you?
You can find me on any social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. You can check
Yeah,
out my website, octoberwip.com. Shoot me an email.
yeah.
Always happy to connect and give advice.
Okay, no worries. Appreciate you for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate
All
it.
good.